Those of the hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. It's Monday night at 9 p.m. and time for Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. Dr. Ricky Siegel is a certified sex therapist, educator, and supervisor, and his brother Larry Siegel is a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator. The Siegel Brothers are here to answer all your questions about sex and sexuality, but we're unsure who to ask, including questions you didn't even know you had. They will also welcome guests from around the globe to talk about a wide variety of topics and issues within the fascinating world of sexuality. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to Sex Talk.
Good evening, and welcome to Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. My name is Dr. Richard Siegel. I'm a certified sex therapist.
And I'm Larry Siegel, a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator.
And my super awesome big brother.
It's still my favorite role.
We are on the radio in South Florida on 95.3 FM and 1470 AM, and streaming live on Facebook.
Hello.
If you're joining us there, hello. Please hit that like and share button freely and help us spread the word.
Yes, indeed.
And get
spread the
everybody...
word, not STIs.
Indeed. Happy New Year to our members of the tribe who are celebrating
the Shana
the
Tova.
Jewish New Year.
Mm-hmm.
Is it 57?
5780. Yeah.
Still writing 79 on my check.
It's going to take a while to get used to that.
So, yes.
So here we are. Another week.
Another week.
Mm-hmm.
And we were watching with rapt attention last night the season premiere episode of Lisa Ling's This Is Life.
Yes.
On CNN.
Yes. And of course, we have to talk about it.
Of course we have to. It would be nice if we can get her to come on our show, but I suspect she wouldn't take our
Right. If anybody knows Lisa Ling out there, please put in a good word. We'll be nice.
Yes. But, I've noticed that she's getting a little more sensationalist. And I guess that's what you got to do for ratings.
Well, unfortunately, that's kind of the medium that it's operating in. It really is about triggering. It is about getting people kind of riled up a little bit. It is about pressing those buttons.
Yeah, so it makes sense to start her season with a show about porn and the evils of porn.
Right. Which that really was the disappointment. It wasn't really... a sort of study of porn or really what it was about. It was a very sort of definite agenda. It was a definite, how do I want to call it? It's certainly a specific point, a specific perception, but it was kind of a sales job for that specific perception.
Well, yeah. I was glad to see that it wasn't completely unbalanced. She offered some views, I guess we'll get to it. The punchline, the most important part of the whole thing, is but one of the things we've been talking about on this show since we started. And big surprise, it comes down to a matter of sex ed, and teaching porn literacy.
This is the punchline,
including porn as part of sex ed, and not, as she did point out, not very effectively though, I thought. Not having porn be the default sexuality educator for a generation, now 2 generations of young people.
If I can revisit a moment of sarcasm that I was in last week on our show, once again, a shout out to all those parents and teachers who have been the obstacles to sex ed. If you don't like what's been happening with porn, if you don't like the ubiquitousness of it, if you don't like the fact that it has become the de facto educator for our kids, well, you made it happen. You did that.
Yeah.
I just want to be very clear about that. Right? It wasn't really just a point of sarcasm last week. This is the issue. And the people that are complaining the most about it are the ones who are most responsible for it. And I am not going to let that one go.
Yeah.
It's too important.
Touche. It's an important point. Shout out to David Hirsch. Happy New Year.
Hey,
Lonsman,
what's up, Dave?
Not surprised he was probably yelling at the TV last night.
Oh, I'm sure he was apoplectic,
And
as many of our colleagues probably were.
Yeah.
So, and anybody that did happen to see it last night, or just again, has been a part of these conversations, give us a call. Join the conversation tonight. Let us know what you think. Let us know what your take on this whole issue
the
is.
call-in number to the studio here is 888-565-1470.
Mm-hmm.
565-1470. 888.
888.
Toll free. Give us a call. Share your thoughts. But, I mean, of course, the most sensationalizing way to start the show was to talk about these no-fap kooks. And,
Yes.
Yes, she mentioned the guy's not a therapist, but she didn't stop presenting him as the host of these
Right.
retreats and intensive therapy
Right. A leader of a
groups.
movement.
Yeah, because...
Right. And you know what? I'll tell you right off the bat, the thing that tightened my sphincter the most, right, was, and this is a problem, and this is part of that sensationalism and all that kind of stuff. But I think one of the points that it started out with is that, well, you look around this no-fap group, look at the different ages of the guys that are involved. That's proof that it can happen to anybody.
Yeah,
And that this is something that happens to people.
and no one is immune.
Yeah.
Right? And I couldn't even believe they went to the oldest cliche since the internet of some kid doing their social studies homework and a pop-up pops up as if that still even happens. Mm-hmm. And that instant exposure gets sucked into the screen because he saw a boob on a pop-up while he was trying to do his homework.
And that did it.
And
That did it.
Just
So,
that's where this porn is the new crack came from. What, 15, 20 years ago?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
We have a caller on the line. Mark, you with us?
Yes, Mark. Hello. You there?
Yes,
Hey, how are you? Thanks for calling in.
you're welcome.
What's on your mind?
Well, I know the Siegel Brothers very well. I'm a sex educator.
Mr.
And-
Sean.
Mark.
Honored to have you call in.
Yeah, it's great to hear you.
Good to be here.
So what did you think?
Of the show,
Yeah.
I was upset by it.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at parents in the United States, and we literally teach our children not to talk and not to ask questions about sexuality.
Right.
I mean, from day one, if you go around, when I used to teach, I would go around the room and ask, what were the names your parents taught you for your genitals?
Right.
You'd go around the room, and if you had 20 kids in the class, you'd get 20 different names.
At least.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We still love to do that with poster board around the paper, poster paper
So,
Yeah.
around the room.
the-
Or
So
even just have
here-
them generate as quickly as they can off the top of their head how many nicknames they can come up with for their genitals. And then do the same thing for any other part of the body.
Right.
So here we are. We have a society where we don't talk about sex, and kids want sexual information.
Mm-hmm.
Today we have the internet. You go on the internet, you search for something about sex, and what comes up?
Porn.
Right.
And I can tell you that people who produce porn are not intending for it to educate 8-year-olds.
Right.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I think that was one of the comments that there was a woman featured on that show last night who was sort of an entertainer, a producer of her own erotica, her own porn. And that was, she was very clear. It's not
Right.
porn's job to educate.
Absolutely.
It's porn's job to entertain.
I mean, is it so unthinkable for a parent to tell their kid before they go for their driver's license road test that, I probably shouldn't have to tell you this, but A, you can't drive as good as you think you can because you can drive good on your video games, and B, you can't drive like that in the
Right.
real world.
Right. You can't
Right.
drive like Smash Taxi.
Yeah, because it's a fantasy, and you should know the difference.
Right.
Right, Mark, you agree that that same
Oh,
kind of message can apply to porn or any other parenting issue?
And if you look at European countries where they have mandatory sex education beginning in primary school, it's a very different story.
Right.
In
Right.
fact, there's a book that was written in Denmark called The True Story How Babies Are Made.
Right.
And it's illustrated and it's very graphic. And
I remember it well.
And about 8 or 9 years ago, the author gave me permission to make an animated film. I was at a professional meeting. This book was intended for 4, 5, 6-year-olds.
Mm-hmm.
And a sex educator came up to me, and she said, "Do you think this is suitable for high schools?"
Ha!
Mm-hmm.
And, it just gives you a sense of our Victorian culture.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I just can't have you on without giving a shout out to your incredible website, sexsmartfilms.com. That's all one word, sexsmartfilms.com.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderfully described by our friend Doug Braun Harvey as the Netflix of sexuality, and it truly is. I invite everybody to go check it out. And
if you go there now, on the homepage is the 4-minute film, The True Story of How Babies Are Made.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I remember another one that I've been looking for. Mark, I wonder if you have a line on this. Also from Scandinavia, I think Norway, and translated in Canada, it was called Sex, A Guide for the Young.
I remember that. We got in trouble.
Yes, we did.
For showing that
Again,
to a group of high
animated. We
schoolers.
used to show it to parents and high
Yep.
schoolers and teachers, and yeah. But the one difficult scene is they suggest that if a girl is too concerned about the pain of her hymen tearing from her first intercourse, she can go ahead and squat over a mirror and tear it herself. Like, okay, that's a little bit much for American tastes.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's just like
Right.
Mark is saying, a film for 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds. People worry if that's
right.
appropriate for
That's
high
right.
schoolers.
And also, Mark, to your point, when you look at the mandatory sexuality education that you see throughout Europe, it's no accident that correlates with such incredibly low rates of unintended pregnancy, sexually transmitted infections, sexual crimes, violence, intimate partner violence, all of those quote, negative consequences
Right.
that what passes for sex ed here is only focused on.
Right.
They really
Ironic.
don't have anywhere near the levels of what we show here. Right? So is it a coincidence that sex ed is correlated with lower rates of all of those negative consequences?
Yeah, and one of the negative consequences you left out is HIV. And if you look at the World Health Organization statistics, the United States, we're 3 to 6 times higher than most of the European countries.
Per capita. Right. And by the way, I do just put that in with other STIs.
Yeah.
It's atrocious.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's almost, to me, it's unconscionable how we do this to our young people.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at our sort of cultural value, if we can say that there's such a thing, when you look at the lens that sexuality education throughout Europe tends to use, it's the lens of biology. It's the lens of the human condition. It's the lens of this is a normal part of who we are. Here, we still have this puritanical lens, this sense that sexuality is not something you are, but something that you do. And we judge it through this arbitrary, moralistic lens, and it only gets us in trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah, well put.
Thank you. And thanks for listening, everybody. That's our show.
No, it's really good to have you on the show, Mark.
It's great to be here, and thank you for doing what you do.
Thanks. Right back at you, brother.
Yeah, you are one of those giants on whose shoulders we stand. You've been fighting this good fight for probably, 40 years?
Yes, and I remember saying to someone, I've been trying to put myself out of business for about 40 years. And I've been up there.
Yep.
Unfortunately, job security is one thing we don't have to worry about.
Yeah, and that is unfortunate.
Yeah, would be. It's a nice fantasy that we all work ourselves out of a job, that we achieve sexual health and we can all find something else to do.
Yeah, I've been saying that for years too. My professional goal is to wake up into a world where what I do is not needed.
Yeah, sure. All right.
Yep. So, hey, Mark, thanks so much for calling in. Great to hear from you.
We'll pick a Monday night soon and have your video in and spend the whole show with us.
Yes, definitely.
That sounds great.
Be
All
well.
right, take care.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Once again, that's www.sexsmartfilms.com. It really is an incredible
and
resource.
check that out before you check out Pornhub.
Yeah. And there's a ton of fun stuff, old sex ed films, and just a ton of really interesting, fun stuff for free. Or if you want to subscribe, then you can really get into the nitty-gritty. There's sex therapy films and some of the old Sinclair films, and it really is a wonderful resource and a great thing to tell your kids about instead of going right to Pornhub.
Right, exactly. And I think that also raises an important point that isn't enough in these discussions, that it's not like something like sex smart films or porn.
Right.
That's the thing that people, there's a place for porn. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you believe. It ain't going nowhere. And this is about providing a context. Right? There's nothing to balance porn. And again, no education, there's no context for it. We don't talk to kids about fantasy. We don't talk to them about what's real and what's not real.
I was glad it was short, but I was glad that in the episode, Lisa Ling did talk to that group in, where was it, Boston? That class?
Yeah.
On porn literacy.
Porn literacy at high school.
And I thought the best line in the whole episode was, what did that high school
Yeah,
girl
it was
say?
a great line. I'm going to make sure that I say it exactly. That basically this again, high school senior. Sex ed teaches safety, but not pleasure. Porn teaches pleasure, but not safety.
How perfect is that?
That really is. And now I'm going to also qualify in that. I'm going to say that at best. Right? Because, there's some things that pass for sex ed that it's, they'll talk about condoms, but without a real context for using them, is there really the safety there?
Yeah, that's a good point. Right.
So I don't think we do enough in a lot of what passes for sex ed.
What you said before is one of those painful ironies that what our sex ed, when it happens, if it happens, is so hysterically focused on, is the one thing that we have the biggest problems with, the highest incidences of any other country in the world. Countries where it's a matter of fact, no-brainer, just assumed.
That's right.
They don't have the problems.
That's absolutely, because you know what? And again, the reality is that the overriding sort of value is that sex is a negative thing. Again, how much of sex ed is all about avoiding negative consequences? Right? What high school, what even very few college sexuality programs, how often have we heard after our classes, sexuality education, college and university classes, that the overriding consensus is, why didn't we get this earlier? How come we never heard of this before?
Why did we never get this in high school?
Where are any discussions about pleasure? Where are any discussions about fantasy? So, I have to say, even the people that are doing some of this work are just as sex negative, only in a slightly different kind of bent.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
Because the focus of sex ed is still disease prevention, consequence prevention.
And even, I am doing a training coming up on the 25th for the Mental Health Counselor Association of Palm Beach on our stuff, our sexuality issues and addiction treatment and recovery, my dissertation topic. And they usually have them at Children's Services Council.
Right.
But the guy, John Davis, who's heading the group, spreading out and forming new relationships, and mine happens to be hosted by Hanley. So, all I heard is that the Joker and Batman, right? Wait till they get a load of me.
Yep.
I'm gonna.
So that'll be good.
The proverbial hooker in church.
I did something like that for the Hanley Center out in Seattle a couple of years ago.
But it comes to mind that the same kind of irony. Who is more fond of saying that cliche definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, than treatment centers?
Right.
And who has been doing the same thing over and over again for the past 25 years and expecting that it's going to start working like magic?
Right.
It doesn't work.
Right.
It's unregulated, and people are just flailing around doing whatever they want, charging whatever they want,
Right.
and scratching their heads. why people don't recover at any appreciable rate.
And people also have to understand, just because people say, right, and just because they say that treatment works doesn't mean it does. That's a whole podcast in and of itself.
Well,
what
that,
they say.
That sex ed, the way we kind of cut our teeth on this, starting with Planned Parenthood and being handed that Big Five, HIV class, STD class, as if it needs two separate classes, right?
Right.
Birth control class, plumbing lesson, parts and parts and parts, and talking to your kids about sex. And you just memorize those 5 programs, and you went into a room full of dopey kids and gave them a pretest, assuming they would get all the questions wrong, and then spend an hour teaching that test, and then give it to them again as a post-test, and they answered 3 or 4 of them right out of 5.
So see, it improved.
And you can tell the grant funders, success.
That's right.
What a wonderful program.
That's right.
Look how effective. It's a bit of a sham, right?
Right.
But sex ed that's focused in pleasure and ownership and empowerment. Thank you, Barb.
Thanks, Barb.
Rochelle, our guest
Hey,
next
Rochelle,
week,
thank
Rochelle
you. Yes,
Faboda. Thank
indeed.
you for tuning in. We're looking forward to having a conversation with you and the awesome Erica Miley. I'm here in Music Point.
Hey, Eric. Good. They say sex with condoms is just as good as without. Oh, I don't know about that.
They do say that, though.
I like to emphasize taking a little sensitivity away is probably a good thing for some guys.
But sex with condoms is intentional and mindful.
That's where I think where focus has to be.
And not groping around in the dark,
right.
literally
Not haphazard.
and figuratively. It's
or as
conscious
haphazard.
of not having to worry about consequences, to truly enjoy a pleasurable experience.
Right. But now again, I have to throw in, that's another little pet peeve, and it's another one of those sort of, even the people who are doing this aren't necessarily getting it right. How many years have we been railing against this idea of just throwing condoms at them and expecting that to be effective? It does. And look at how we set this whole thing up. No wonder porn is such a viable option for people. It's the only one that makes sense to most young people. and again, people need to understand, too, that's not an accident that most of these no-fappers and most of these guys that, think porn has destroyed their brain and ruined their life and, have all these issues with porn and this porn-induced erectile dysfunction. You think there's another accident why you're talking about basically adolescent males? From the youngest part of adolescence through their 20s.
Yeah.
Not many 50-year-olds complaining about this.
Yeah.
This is a young man's thing because it has to do with how they create the foundation for their own sexuality.
And if it starts when they're 8 looking at porn, of course it's going to be skewed and
Exactly.
nothing close to a healthy development and understanding about, first of all, another person.
Right. Well, that's the big factor right there. Really, that is the major factor right there.
You can't blame porn that eons before there was anything, when porn was the Sears and Roebuck brassiere ads in the catalog, right? That guys didn't grow up with a message that sex is something you do to someone instead of with someone.
Right.
Right? Guys say, did you do her? When they're asking their buddies about a date. Not a with mutual proposition. That's the message in porn, but it's not like porn invented it or put that in guys' heads.
Of course not. But again, what makes it so attractive for so many young men is we have set up the sexual world as containing 2 choices. You either have intercourse, that's the condom approach,
right,
or you do nothing. Right?
Abstain.
We've created a world where the only choices are having intercourse or abstinence.
Right, and nobody's even talking about what that means.
Right, exactly.
Like
that's the whole thing, too. It's that we misuse that term.
Great sex while abstaining from intercourse. Right, nobody's talking to high school kids about that.
Well, again,
Jocelyn Elders
I was just going to say, a great irony.
Right?
Yeah. Because she recommended teaching high school seniors how to derive pleasure from their own body.
That was Bill Clinton's biggest disappointment. Nothing else. Firing Jocelyn Elders for talking about what he should have. Right. He should have heeded her advice instead of doing the intern thing.
Right. So it comes down to reference points. It comes down to what choices are people, especially young people, given. And when we give them nothing, when we tell them you don't ask, you don't talk about it, you don't show it, and then when they do have a question, like Mark just said, you have a question, a legitimate question about sexuality, and you do go and look it up, you're going to get porn.
Right. And we can't let our time go by without re-emphasizing that important point. I think we made it just a couple of weeks ago and comes up often, right? That the reason why it's so much easier to just go right to the porn is that we're still too immature and uncomfortable to talk about masturbation.
That's a big part of it.
So that's a huge part of it.
I mean, it is a huge part of it, but what I don't think it's the whole thing is
It's
because there
looking
is
at
a
porn.
conditioning process.
That's what these NoFap guys are talking about. That's where they, quote, get hooked.
Right, but see,
because
but
they can't respond. They believe
but
they can't respond any
You're right,
other way.
but that idea of getting hooked is also an abdication of responsibility
Yes.
and will.
Say it, brother.
Right? So, yes, I honestly believe that there is a conditioning factor. When you get used to only that kind of stimulation, and let's face it, guys in general, especially heterosexual guys, are stunningly uncreative when it comes to their own masturbation. Right? I've said this before too. I mean, you can rock a guy's world. You can shake it to the foundation simply by suggesting he use his other hand.
Yeah.
And so many guys can't even handle that. So when they're so used to that very narrow, very restrictive kind of stimulus dynamic, which they're
Can't respond to
already
anything else.
They're already uncomfortable with other people. They're already uncomfortable with intimacy. There's already performance anxiety and social
And
anxiety
there's
that's
no
already
other
feeding it.
act you can do with a partner that's going to duplicate the
That's
death
right.
grip that
That's
most
right.
guys have on themselves.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And now you add another person into this mix where now they're just going to shut down.
Right.
So it's not the porn. It is the way we are helping, quote unquote, guys sexually develop and reach some level of maturity, sexual or otherwise. It's not happening. And that's the issue.
Speaking of shutting down, you know what the music means.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you for joining us. Please feel free to comment and leave some messages and like and share. And we
Yeah, this
will
is an
be
ongoing
here
discussion.
next Monday and every Monday at 9 o'clock for more Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers.
Have a great week.
You've been listening to Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. Join us every Monday night at 9 p.m. on WNN, 1470 AM and 95.3 FM. Or watch live streaming video at AMP2 TV Productions on Facebook, or look for the shows on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you'll join us again next week.